Grace, peace, and welcome to Podcast of the Wills, a podcast that treats Star Wars like a sacred text. My name is Nick Milkey, and it is Sunday night. It is Valentine's Day. We're here to talk about all the love in Star Wars. It's been a great week. I hope everybody that is tuning in, is watching, is doing well, is having a great Valentine's Day. You've spent all your time with your loved ones, and now you're here to hang out with me and a really awesome guest. I'm so excited to have this guest on. I don't really have any news to talk about this week. There has been some Star Wars news. I think we all kind of know what it is already, and it's better left alone at this point. I think some good decisions were made. I'm excited for those changes, and I'm ready to see Star Wars continue to be happy, fun, and keep that hashtag spark of positivity going. So we're going to get right into it. We're going to bring on our guest. My guest tonight is Marquis. I met Mark on Twitter, one of my Star Wars internet friends, as my wife likes to call them. Mark is one of the hosts over at the Clashing Sabers Network. He hosts a podcast called Forever Star Wars. And among the many other awesome things about Mark, I learned at some point as we were talking on Twitter, messages back and forth between different people, that Mark is also a fellow Alabamian. Mark lives in Birmingham, which is about an hour north of where I live. So as he said to me, it's great to have a chance to talk Star Wars with a fellow Alabamian. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Mark in and we're going to keep going. Mark, what is up? Good evening.
Hey there, Nick.
How are you, sir?
I'm doing fine. Thank you.
Excellent. So thank you so much for being here on a Sunday night on Valentine's Day. Hopefully your husband wasn't too mad that I stole you away for a little while. Hopefully y'all have had some Valentine's Day already today.
Oh, he understands. He's fully supportive of any Star Wars diversion that I find myself in.
Hey, we take every Star Wars diversion we can get. Michael's here. Michael's in Arkansas. He said, yes, more of us Southern folks. So got to keep all the Southern Star Wars fans, connected however we can. Well, I am so glad you're here. We're going to get into talking a little bit more and learning a little bit more about you, your Star Wars story, about what you do with Clashing Sabers. But first, and I'm so glad that you were willing to humor me, this is my second week of attempting to be the Stanley Tucci of Star Wars podcasts. For anybody that's watching or listening, Stanley Tucci, especially during quarantine, has started making cocktails and putting up videos on Instagram and going live. And I like drinks and cocktails, and I host a live Star Wars TV show on the internet. And I thought, why not do that and make cocktails and name them after guests? So last week was the first one. We made Jerry Juice with Jerry from the Bombad cast. And so tonight, and I forgot to make the recipe card, so I will put that up on Twitter later tonight if anybody's interested. We're going to make what I'm calling the Mark's Mandalorian Fizz. Mark has graciously agreed to let me do this and not make it seem weird. So what we're going to do, and I'm going to try and do this on camera, which means I should have opened bottles ahead of time and been prepared. But what we're going to do, we're going to get our cup. And I've tried to come up with criteria for these drinks as I'm doing this. Like, I don't need shakers. It's too crazy to have too much extra apparatus while I'm doing this. So what's a good cocktail you can make in a glass? What is something that actually I'm going to drink and like? And so tonight, our big ingredient is bourbon, which I'm a huge fan of bourbons and whiskeys of all kinds. As I like to do, I have one of my Burger King Star Wars vintage glasses that I'm going to use tonight. It felt like the occasion called for it. I've got some ice already in here. And so what I'm going to do first is I'm going to pour up shots worth of bourbon. I'll do this, try to make this seem like a good presentation. I'll pour it all over my computer. So we've got our bourbon. Next, we're going to add a shot of Amaretto.
By the way, I was trying to go out and buy all the ingredients for this so that I could do this with you, and I couldn't find Amaretto.
I honestly don't know how long I've had the Amaretto that was in my liquor cabinet. So if I fall over halfway through this, we're going to blame it on the Amaretto. And I also remember when I started, I guess, legally drinking, because when I was illegally drinking in high school and college, it was just cheap beer because that's what you could find. Mm-hmm. But when I turned of age and started trying to order drinks at a bar, and maybe this is like most everybody, I think the first real drink I ever ordered was an Amaretto Sour. And I had one like 5 years ago. I was like, oh yeah, I remember Amaretto Sours. It doesn't hold up well over time for me. So we've got our bourbon, we've got our Amaretto. I'm supposed to have a tablespoon of cherry juice. I didn't bring a tablespoon, so we're going to take this jar of Publix cherries and just pour a little cherry juice in here. And then I'm going to top it off with some cranberry LaCroix, little fizz seltzer. Not all the way to the top because I don't want to lose my booze. So we have here, it's got a nice little red color. What I'm calling Mark's Mandalorian Fizz. And Mark wasn't able to get all his ingredients, but he does have some bourbon. So
no, I have whiskey and I have Maker's Mark.
Ooh,
so do I get points for?
You get definite points for that. That's right. Yeah. Absolutely. You've got Maker's Mark. So I raise my glass to you, sir, and thank you for being here to hang out.
Thank you for having me.
I think that'll work. That's not too terrible. So, Mark, you're here. We've gotten my nonsense out of the way. Tell us a little bit about your Star Wars origin story, a little bit about yourself, and, how you came to Star Wars, what that was for you, growing up. I think you and I seem to be probably about the same age or in the same age range. So I have an idea of where your Star Wars story comes from, but tell us a little bit about you and your connections with Star Wars.
Yeah, I go all the way back to the original. I'm an original trilogy Generation X kid. My first memory of Star Wars was being in a food world with my mom, and I was in the checkout line, and there was a newspaper or a magazine nearby that had some article, and the title was like biggest movie coming, or movie of the summer or something. It was announcing that this movie was coming, and it was called Star Wars. And my memory of it was, after we checked out, we were going out into the parking lot. I was in the buggy, and I remember thinking, that's a real stupid name for a movie. And so my first memory is thinking that the title was horrible, but obviously that impression didn't stick because, from that point on, my life was all about Star Wars once I actually saw it. I saw it. I'm pretty sure that I saw it at a theater on Green Springs Highway in Birmingham.
Okay.
And the theater chain used to be Cobb Cinemas.
Mm-hmm. I remember Cobb Cinemas.
And the theater's not there anymore, but I went with my dad, and the memories are very hazy because I was 7. So I kind of vaguely remember standing in line and being outside the building. So I think the line wrapped around the building. There was enough people there for the line to actually be into the parking lot. And I remember like certain moments in the film, but I don't remember the entire thing. It's kind of like trying to remember a dream that it's very hazy.
Did that happen or did that not happen? Yeah.
So I just remember sort of feelings associated with it. I remember that there was a lot of stuff there was some stuff that was a little scary for me because I was a kid that had been raised on Disney films.
Absolutely.
And, because I came from a Southern Baptist home, so we were only allowed to watch Disney movies as kids. So seeing Star Wars, that was the first movie that had anything approaching graphic violence in it. Seeing the severed arm in the cantina, or seeing, Anne and Uncle outside the homestead, their charred remains. That was really terrifying.
It was wild. And I think to, like you say, kind of the dream aspect of it, or kind of remembering it, or how you remember it. I think for me, some of those scenes in that movie, having seen it as a kid also, it's kind of like I always say, like my grandparents' house. My grandparents' house in Illinois growing up was the biggest house I'd ever seen in my life. And when I went back and visited it when I was like 22 years old and they hadn't lived there in years, like it was smaller than the house I live in now. And I thought, how is that possible? Because like my perspective of as a kid changed it all. And I think about that, especially in the 2 scenes that you mentioned. The arm getting cut off in the cantina was the bloodiest thing I'd ever seen in my life. Mm-hmm. And Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru's burned, corpses laying out there in the ground was just horrifying. And now it's still not, super pleasant and fun, but like it's not as dramatic as I think I thought it was as a kid.
No, and it, the thing about, parents are always concerned about how's this affecting my child. Well, it didn't scar me. I mean, it was just something I'd never seen before, mm-hmm. and it was new, and I think it kind of put the movie and it put my mind into a place where I was more receptive to it because I was seeing things I'd never seen before. And on top of thematic elements I'd never seen before, I was seeing literal visuals that I'd never seen before and no one had seen before. So I was just the perfect age. You know, the movie was made for kids and it was made for me. So that was my first exposure to Star Wars. And then, you know, as the years went on, I had, you know, my memories are from like just talking about Star Wars on the playground during recess at school. And I remember the build up to Empire and discussions that we had on the playground after Empire as to what happened and what's going to happen to Han, and is Vader really his father? For the second movie, my dad took me again, but then by that time I had my younger brother. So it was me, my dad, and my younger brother who went. And then by the time Jedi rolled around, my mom then decided, okay, I'll go watch this one. And so it was the entire family that went to see it. So each consecutive movie, more of the family went until we were all there for the third film. So that was my gateway into the world of Star Wars. And then after Star Wars was kind of over at that period, I wasn't somebody that really got into the expanded universe. I did watch the Ewok films. I do remember the Ewok films. I do remember thinking that the special effects and the world building was still there, even though the shows were very crude and the acting was.
It had lost something, but you could see the bones of it underneath.
Yeah, I could see the DNA of Star Wars in it, and I remember thinking, there's always this thing about Star Wars where you kind of feel it. It's like that universe feels right somehow. But I didn't really keep up with a lot of the expanded universe stuff until when I got to be in my 20s. I started going back and collecting films and getting into movies and collecting movies. And the first films that I bought, did you ever have Laserdiscs?
I did not have Laserdiscs, but my friend Andy that hosts the Holo Chronicles podcast, he has a little Laserdisc collection that he's still hanging on to. And I'm really thankful that he hasn't called me out on this show. But I found on Facebook not too long ago the episode 1 Phantom Menace Laserdisc. And I was so excited, and I took a screenshot of it and I sent it to him in Facebook Marketplace. And he was like, buy it, I'll send you the money, have it shipped to me, whatever. So I was so excited that I had found this for him because he didn't have that one. I knew he had the original 3. And it got to his house, and it's a VHS, and it's the deluxe edition of the Phantom Menace VHS, but it's in a big square box. And so I just looked at it. I was like, oh, that's definitely a Laserdisc. Like, it seemed to be the right size on the screen. So he was like, well, it's cool. I mean, it comes in a special edition box set, but it's not what he thought it was. So no, I didn't have the Laserdisc, but I also remember being in college when Laserdisc kind of was a thing. And like, I remember going, like, we'd go over here to the Montgomery Mall, and we would go to either, Peppermint, whatever the record stores were, not FYE. What was the one that sold like Hollywood Movie or whatever it was?
Yeah.
Some of the movie stores. I can't think of the name of them now, but it weren't just music. It was like all the movies and like
Suncoast.
Yeah. Suncoast. That's exactly it. Suncoast. Yeah. Go in Suncoast and you could buy like merchandise and t-shirts and movies and all this other stuff. And that Laserdisc display, like, it was I was like, I'm in college and I don't have money for that, but that looks really awesome.
Well, it was so cutting edge. It was like the best sound and the best picture. Of course, it wasn't HD, but it was, compared to VHS, it was so much better. And, I was still living with my parents. I had disposable income. So I could afford to buy a Laserdisc player, but that's really when I got a Laserdisc player and started collecting the original films on Laserdisc and rewatching them. That's when I'd always loved Star Wars, but that's when I really started to deep dive into it as a hardcore fan, because I was studying the movies at that point. And I'm pretty sure that we had the VHS tapes along the way, but I just don't remember going back and watching them over and over and over again like a lot of people did. It wasn't until Laserdisc that I started really watching them on repeat pretty heavily. And then, like, the 90s, the memory I have of the 90s was the slow build up to the prequels, because we knew they were going to do the prequels. We found out about the prequels and the special edition around the same time.
That's right.
Like, they were going to be making the special edition, and it was going to lead into the prequels. So, that was just a period of just anticipation of what is that going to be like. And, CGI was brand new. The Jurassic Park had just hit. So they were able to do almost anything in movies. So this idea that they could go back and do new special effects for Star Wars was such a cool idea to me. Like, I've just always been a sucker for visual effects and
absolutely
all of that. So, that aspect of the special editions was really exciting to me, and getting to see them again in a theater. And then the prequels hit, and, being that I'm the original trilogy generation, you would think that I would have been one of the people that was disappointed with it, because supposedly it was my generation or our generation that was so upset with it. And I remember being disappointed in the Phantom Menace, but not to the degree that a lot of people were.
Absolutely.
And I liked the prequels, and I had issues with it, but I just didn't spend a lot of time upset about how it turned out. And as they sort of went to video and I actually found myself watching the prequels more than I ever watched the original trilogy.
Okay.
So I have seen the prequels probably more times. I mean, the prequels more times than the original trilogy.
Wow, how about that? That's pretty cool. Yeah, same thing. Like, and you're right. Special editions came out in 97 and Phantom Menace came out in 99. So it was kind of like that announcement. And like you said, that was the build up and the run up to it. For me, seeing the special editions in the theater was the chance to see all three movies in the theater. I was born in 78. And so I got Empire. I was little, but by the time Return of the Jedi came out, we went and saw that at the drive-in theater in our station wagon, like as a family. And so I did get to see that one in the movie theaters, but the rest of it was, I remember my dad had the beta player. And so at some point, the ones that I saw the most as a kid were recorded off of HBO at whatever point HBO ran those movies, because I'll never forget that intro and the old HBO intro where the stars would like curve around the O and it was like the flashing lights and whatever. And I wore those tapes out. And then at some point we got the VHS versions. And then I had, as I got older and probably got into like junior high and high school, I used money to buy like the box set of, a new set of the originals, the unaltered ones. And then the special editions came out and I bought that box set. So at some point I had both box sets, and the build up, like you said, to Phantom Menace was just a part of, going into it. I was halfway through college at that point when that came out. And like you, I was disappointed, but I wasn't angry. And I don't think I knew that I had the opportunity to be angry, like compared to what we see now and what we see, in the Star Wars fandom so much. Like, it never occurred to me to be pissed off that it wasn't what I wanted it to be. I just went, it seemed kind of strange. It seemed a little bit kiddie. Like, it was a little more juvenile than I expected it to be. But I was never mad. And I just kind of, at one point after the other two came out, I just kind of went, well, it's not for me. And more than anything, I just kind of ignored them. Like, I was like, well, I still like the other ones, but whatever. But it's always interesting to hear that, to hear you say, you've watched the prequels more than the originals, to a point. I think it's really cool. And I think, especially like you said, the expectation that all original trilogy people are going to hate this is not how it necessarily is. Right.
And I mean, if you really press me on it, I do think the original trilogy is better, most definitely. And because Empire is my favorite film of all time. So I hold that in very high regard, but there's just something about the prequels that just feel even more escapist to me, because they are, when you just kind of accept them on their own terms, they're visually stunning. Like, I think they still are. Like, people complain about too much CGI, but I think that the world building in those movies is just unmatched, even to this day.
Naboo, those sets in Italy, that's real life. Like, that's unbelievable. we've just recently, I have my kids have joined me in playing Battlefront, and like one of their favorite places to go is the Naboo Palace that's on Battlefront 2, because you get to run around in that hangar. And yeah, and I agree with you. I think that it was so visually stunning. And I also think, and lots of other people on other shows always talk about different windows and doors into Star Wars. How I got into Star Wars is not how my 12-year-old twins got into Star Wars. And I remember several years ago when I started going, oh, I'm going to get them to like this thing that I like. I think I showed them one of the OT movies, probably Star Wars, thinking we'll start at the beginning and keep going. And they were just kind of so-so about it. And when we got to the prequels, they were way more locked in. And there was that part of me that was like, it speaks more of their language. It's brighter. It's and it's also part of the storytelling, which I always admired, like with George Lucas. One of the things we always loved and talked about with original Star Wars was how it was a world that felt lived in. It was dirty. It was dusky. It was dusty. It was Tatooine. And the prequel era was kind of the height of everything. And it was shiny. And it was, and Jar Jar was certainly a draw for them. He was funny. He was the comic relief. But to watch him with my kids who were young at that time gave me even a different appreciation of it, of going, oh, there's a different way to see this. And I even felt that watching the sequel trilogy movies and taking my girls to the theater, and the ones that I wasn't certain about and never disliked, but just had to spend more time thinking and going, how do I feel about this? How, whatever. And to sit next to them in a seat and just watch them be enthralled helped me like it even more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's the great advantage. Being that I don't have kids, that's something that I envy about people like yourself who have kids, that you get to experience that through their eyes, because introducing children to something like that, you're potentially opening up a lifetime obsession for somebody. And you get to see it in a fresh way. That I think that a lot of people need to try to remember when they go into these films and they bring, a lifetime of baggage of expectation and what these movies have to live up to. Children don't bring any of that with them.
That's exactly right.
They come into it completely open to the story. And that's something I've tried to keep with me as an adult, is this going into the film and just sort of meeting it and accepting it on its own terms. And hopefully it works and you get to go along for the ride, but not treating movies as if they have to be adversarial. Like you go in like
change my mind. Yeah.
Convince me that you're worth seeing.
Right. No.
Like that kind of attitude. That's just never been my attitude.
No, absolutely. And I'm 100% with you on that. And I think too, we also have the differing elements of that when it comes to all the other things like animated series, books. Now we've got Mandalorian as a TV show. Like there's so many different avenues. And, I love Star Wars Rebels. That's one of my favorite. And like of all the new Star Wars, I love Rebels a lot. I like Clone Wars. I appreciate Clone Wars, but I didn't watch it originally when it was on, and kind of had to go back to it. And I always say I used it as a reference book. So like if there was something that happened in Rebels, like the Darksaber, I'm like, oh, I need to go back and find that in Clone Wars and watch the Darksaber arc of Clone Wars to get an understanding of what this was. But then Resistance, like I've watched 1 or 2 episodes of Resistance, but it didn't grab me and it wasn't for me. But I also don't have to be angry about it. And I'll go back at some point because I want to know those stories too. But there's so many avenues. And one of the things that I try to really push, and we talk about a lot on this show, and, the Twitter presence that either I have personally or through this podcast, is we use hashtag spark of positivity a lot. Like if Star Wars makes us mad, we shouldn't be in Star Wars. Like that's not what we're here for.
Right.
And, and I hear that a lot. And not only what you say, but even listening to your show. And that kind of gives me a chance to get you to talk a little bit about Forever Star Wars and what you're doing with Clashing Sabers. I described it. I said it to you, and I was thinking about it this week before you came on. One of the things I love about your show is it's unique to me in that it's really like an audio essay. it's different than, it's not just a podcast where, somebody sits down like me and goes, well, here's the news and here's this and here's that. And, like, share, subscribe, whatever. Like, it's very, you've put a lot of work in on the front end to write it, produce it. Tell us about that, because I think that's so neat.
Yeah. When Brandon Boylan, who is the head of Clashing Sabers, when he brought me in originally as a writer for the website at clashingsabers.net. Go visit it if you want to
absolutely
check out some great articles. But he was then started approaching some of us writers about, hey, would you like to do a podcast? And I had never thought about it. And then I was like, well, yeah, I think I would. And I had been listening to some podcasts that I admired a lot. There's a series that David Collins does, the soundtrack show. But back then it was Star Wars Oxygen. Okay. And he did this show where he would sort of analyze the music of Star Wars and break it down. And then when he moved to the soundtrack show, his show was very, very polished and very essay-like you said. It takes an almost, I want to say, what's the word for it? Not analytical, not kind of educational, but more
almost like an exegetical.
Yeah. So that's sort of what I sort of had in mind, of taking things that I love about Star Wars and really breaking them down and really deep diving into the backstories of them, like the production stories, this kind of like extra content on a DVD. Like, you want to see how things were made, or you want to see like what the thought process was in these scenes. So that's kind of the approach that I took. And the first few episodes were very rough because I was just sort of working with the audio software for the first time and just getting my feet wet. But as it sort of went on, I just really started to really get into the entire, like, being the one-man show of it, like the writing and the producing of it and the collecting all the sound clips and doing all the editing and the sound mixing. And I found that, like, that was something that I really did very well, and I really liked doing it. So that's been the most rewarding part of the show, was just learning that that's a skill I didn't know that I had.
Sure.
But yeah, it just sort of, it's a show that sort of takes a deep dive into various aspects of Star Wars, whether it's the music of John Williams. It could be I did an entire episode once about the Force and how the Force has been used throughout all the films and the TV shows. And I capped it off with my own theory about what the Force is. And like you said, like your show is sort of treating Star Wars as like the scriptural text almost of it. That's kind of how I was sort of approaching it in my show.
Absolutely.
And it probably has to do with my religious background. Probably had a lot to do with that.
Sure.
To be honest.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's so great. And you hit on something that I love. And I'll, full disclaimer up front, I've listened to several of your shows even before I invited you to come on. When I found you on Twitter, I was like, oh, there's a Birmingham Star Wars podcaster. I need to listen to this. And so I've listened to several, but there's so many more that I've got queued up that I want to get to, because I am such a sucker for, I always call it process. It's not always just process, but like behind the scenes, how did they do that? Like, I want to hear about, I was halfway through listening to the audiobook, the Anthony Daniels audiobook that he put out, IMC3PO, I think is what it's called. And like literally just listening to him tell the story of like the first time he walked into that room and all those plastic bits of that costume were spread all over everywhere. And how, like, I just endlessly fascinated by a making of documentary, Empire of Dreams. I mean, the director and the Jedi, my gosh, I could watch that as much as I watched Last Jedi, which is a lot. And so I'm a sucker for that kind of stuff. So you've got a lot of things that I can't wait to dig even deeper into and check out. But I love that format too, that you've done the research and you've laid it all out, ahead of time to come in and, put that information out. I've thought about that before. I get in modes where I'm like, I'm going to write an article about this. And so like, I'll write articles and I've just got them saved on my computer. Like, I don't know what I think I'm going to do with them. I don't have a Podcast of the Wills website, but at some point maybe I will, because random Star Wars thoughts that we feel like we have to put down on paper somewhere, got to end up somewhere. But it's an outlet, and it's a creative outlet. And so, for you, it's neat that Star Wars can manifest itself not only as something that you've loved your whole life, but can also be this creative expression that you have as well.
Yeah, the one part of the show that I really, really was surprising to me was there's elements of the show where I kind of create my own sound effects. And so I found that like being a sound editor or even a Foley artist is something that I probably would have been very good at if I had gone into the film industry. And that was not something that I ever saw myself as doing. I did not realize that sound editing and mixing was something that I would really take to. I just wish I could find a way to make money doing it.
Wouldn't that be fantastic? Yeah, that would be so fun.
Because it is such a time consuming thing. I mean, it's done out of love because it takes so much time. And here lately, I've had a lot of work and home projects stuff going on. So the show's been in a bit of a creative hiatus in the last couple of months. But like I was telling you earlier, just doing research for this episode with a list that we're going to go over shortly, I was coming up with ideas for new forever Star Wars shows. So it just, as soon as the creative wheels start turning, it leads to other things.
Absolutely. I love that so much. And I think that's what, I'm inspired by other shows that I listen to. And I've said this many times, but switching to a live format was inspired by watching stuff that other people do and going, I can't do what they do, but I want to do my version of that. Like, I don't want to. Actually, sometimes I go back to one of my favorite lines from my favorite TV show of all time, which is The West Wing, when Rob Lowe's talking about one of the speeches he wrote for the president. And he said, great writers borrow from other writers, or good writers borrow from other writers. Great writers steal from them outright. So, if you see something somebody's doing really well, you're like, I should do that too, because it's good. Why wouldn't I want to be good also?
You need to talk to Drew Brett, who's with Clashing Sabers. He's a big West Wing fan. I am too, actually. We're both big West Wing fans.
I've joked at times. In fact, I mentioned Star Wars Minute guys earlier when we were talking. They'll make jokes every now and then about when are we going to get like the West Wing version of Star Wars, where it's just the Imperial Senate and all the ins and outs. In fact, let me throw this up here. My friend Raven just popped in, and Raven says, "All hail Sam Seaborn." Raven hit me early on with a Yo-Yo Ma rules a couple months back when I mentioned West Wing on something, and so I knew she was one of us, as Toby says, or as Sam says to Toby about Will Bailey. He's one of us. So, I love that stuff. But I love, like you said, just the creative outlets, the things that inspire us to do something else and to have a hobby. And again, over the course of quarantine, over the last 10, 11, almost 12 months at this point. For me, this has been another creative outlet because we've been home and we haven't gone anywhere. And so to be able to spend time doing this or connecting with new friends, like there's a lot. And that's what I love about the Star Wars community, because it's something I grew up with and I've had my whole life, but it keeps kind of adding new elements along the way, which to me is also so amazing.
I have to give you props for looking at the live format and saying, hey, that's something I want to do, because it's something that terrifies me. Doing a live show terrifies me. Like, I have to have it. That's the reason I do scripted, is because I get to finesse it and then like edit out the stuff that doesn't work. But you can't do that when it's live.
No, I can't. And there's a double side to that. There's the part that goes, well, it's in here, it's out there. But it also simplifies the process a little bit, because when I get done, I just get to throw an intro at the beginning and an outro at the end and go, here's the show. True. I don't have to be quite so time consumed in editing, but it works well either way. And I laugh a lot over the course of my careers. When I was in high school, the idea that I would be any kind of public speaker, I would have laughed in your face and then like went and cried in a corner, because I was terrified to speak in public. Was not, that just wasn't my thing. I was very shy. I was whatever. But as I got into college and as I, went into the different lines of work that I was in, as in ministry, as a nonprofit director, like those were key parts of those jobs. And I've gotten to the point where I love public speaking. Like if you told me tomorrow I need to go do a speech or something, especially if I know it and am prepared for it, in front of, 15,000 people, I'd be scared, but I'd be excited to do it. Like I would relish the opportunity. And I think a part of that plays into something like going live on the internet. And, but I'm also sitting with a bunch of Star Wars toys behind me and just having drinks and laughing and hanging out. So that makes it easy too. But it's all fun, and everybody has a different skill set and a different gift and a different way to connect. So I love your show. And like I said, I'm excited to dig deeper into the back catalog and find some of the other things in there that I haven't had a chance to listen to yet. Well, you mentioned the list. It is Valentine's Day, and I sent you this list, and you were game to play with it. So I'm excited that we are going to dive in. Let me get my fancy banner up here. That's the other part of live show producing, is trying to get all this stuff up as we go along. Mark has been kind enough to join us for top 7 Star Wars Valentines. I didn't give him a lot of rules. I didn't give any real, that's not how love works. There's not rules in love. You just go for it. I said it could be existing Star Wars couples. I said that it could be ships, as the kids call them. Who do you want to see together? Whatever it is. And we started with 7. We're going to go down to number 1. I do know that when he sent me his list, he said these aren't necessarily in a particular order, but I ranked them 7 to 1. And I think I did rank them in the order that you sent them to me. So,
okay.
So there shouldn't be surprises.
Well, the order may have changed, but
okay. Well,
it's okay. I can roll with it.
Okay. Well, we're going to do our best here. That's what we do in a live show. We just roll with it. So what I have down for you for number 7 is I have Anakin and Padme. And what we're going to do as we go through this list is tell us your thoughts. Tell us what, lined up for you. I've got some silly little images I'm going to try and get up here for us of our Valentines. And where did Anakin and Padme go? There they are. Come to Naboo and be my boo.
That's adorable.
What is Anakin and Padme for you?
It's funny that this would be the first one, because this was as I was writing out my thoughts on this was one of the most challenging ones, because I actually ended up ranking this number 2 on my list, but for me it's the most problematic romance for a myriad of reasons. I think the first and foremost reason why it's problematic for me is that there's something lacking in the execution of it. On paper, and as it serves the story, it works great. Like, I understand the romance as it's intended. It just falls short in the acting category and the writing category. But the broad strokes work, and how it ends up affecting the larger story, I think, works. And the dynamic between them works because of what it says about the Jedi and the Jedi's aversion to attachment, and what that does to people, and what it causes someone, so the choices that it makes people make in their relationships. And I'm kind of interested in more about what it does to Anakin than it is about being a great romance. I think it serves the character down the line more than it serves in the moment as being a great romance. It's very romantic and beautiful.
Right.
So it ends up being number 2 on the list because it is so impactful to the larger saga. I mean, it's the romance that really kicks off the entire Skywalker saga. I mean, none of the other things could exist if Padme and Anakin didn't, hook up.
Absolutely.
But it's still a complicated relationship, because at least in its execution, I have issues with. I can understand why Anakin is obsessed with her. I don't understand why she is into him. Absolutely. At least in Attack of the Clones. Now, the Clone Wars did a better job of sort of showing more how they work.
Relationship.
Yeah, how they work as a couple, and their banter, and their comfort level with each other. And understanding of each other seems to work so much better in that series. But then that was a series that was built on hindsight of being able to go back and say, hey, it didn't work so great in the movie, so let's flesh it out more in this series.
A chance to fix it or improve it a little bit.
Improve it, yeah.
Well, and I agree. And I have a thought with that. And I kind of came to this thought listening to the Bombad cast the other night, because they did a version of Star Wars Valentines. And it hit me listening to them talk. Padme never really had a life of her own, because she grew up and she became, I think, the youngest queen, that they had on Naboo, and she was a senator. And so she always had this very regimented life, very laid out in front of her, very whatever. And so it wasn't just the typical, like, oh, he's a bad boy thing, or this guy that I met 10 years ago. But like, she could just, he was kind of a straight up creeper and a weirdo at times, but she was fine with it because her whole life had been dictated to her, and she had been told where to go and what to do and what meeting to be in. And so it was almost like he was an escape for her in some level to, get outside of what her norm was. He may have had problems, but it wasn't her problem.
Right. That's exactly what I wrote in my notes, was that they were each so bound by their responsibilities to their career.
They escaped to each other.
They were an escape for each other. So
absolutely.
Yeah, and like that's what I refer to as the broad strokes of their relationship make perfect sense.
Yeah, Brandon just says down here in the chat, he says, I always saw Padme thinking of it as an escape from politics, and that's exactly kind of how I see it, is that chance to, to get away, because she had always been, dictated to where to be, what to do, all the responsibility she had. And, with Anakin, she didn't have to have that responsibility.
And if you think about it, Anakin is not terribly concerned with politics.
No, not at all.
He is much more of a visceral human being. And that I can see as being the appeal for Padme.
That's right. He's a reactionary, let's go. He'd much rather go respond, to aggressive negotiation than, have a sit down meeting where we try to hash things out and come up with it in a committee, as Han Solo would say.
Right.
Well, let me do this. I took the numbers off of my banner. So tell me what you have next, and we'll get to this in the order that you had. What did you have for your number 6, I guess?
Okay. Let's go back to, I'm going to go back.
Or what you had at 7, since I got you out of order. Tell me where to go next.
So, and I'm totally using my notes as cheat sheet. So
no problem.
I'm total dork here. I chose the number 7, Han and the Millennium Falcon.
Oh, yes.
As one of the great romances of Star Wars. Now, I didn't leave out Kira because I don't think that's a great romance. I think that movie did a great job of showing that relationship in a fascinating light. I love the story of Han and Kira in their early years, and I would love to see more of Kira, but more about her relationship or her rising up in the ranks of Crimson Dawn. And I want to see that story play out, not necessarily more of Kira and Han, because Han, we know, is moving on to meet Leia. So his destiny lies elsewhere romantically. But that, to me, the real romance in Solo Star Wars story is him meeting the Falcon for the first time.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
I mean, we learned that his dad built, Corellian freighters. So he has a family connection to them. And his family origins are still very murky. I get a sense in that film that he's a runaway. I don't think he's an orphan. And I don't think that the expanded material has said anything really about his dad, at least in current canon. I know that Legends spoke about his dad, but his dad is still something of a mystery in the current canon. But yeah, the way that the movie reveals the Falcon for the first time and he sees it, and the Star Wars theme plays, it's like the romance theme.
That's right.
He's all googly eyed when he's looking at it for the first time.
It's so good. And you're so right about the point about his dad building them. Like when I heard that the first time I saw Solo, I was just like, damn, that's really good. Like, that was one of those moments that hit me, just like, give him a connection to it. Like, we don't know who his parents are. He's set up as an orphan at the beginning, but automatically it's not just a ship. It's a ship that he's familiar with because his dad built him. And so to me, that was really brilliant in a very small, one line of dialogue that opens up this whole other possibility or connecting point to who he is.
The other thing that movie does well that I like was showing the difference between how Lando treated the ship and how Han treated the ship, because the Falcon is both of their ships. They consider that their ship. But for Lando, it was a bachelor pad. It was a Ferrari. It was his muscle car.
Mm-hmm.
It was a status symbol for him. And I don't think Han is the least bit interested in the Falcon as a status symbol. Han sees it as an extension of himself.
That's right.
The Falcon is him. The Falcon is able to get through can beat incredible odds and come out on the other side, intact. It may be beaten up, but it's intact.
And the guts of it are what's important. Like, he spends all the time with the special modifications, but the special modifications are not the escape pod and a clean paint job. The special modifications are the things that, it's got it where it counts, as he says to, I think, Leia, when they're backing out of the Death Star in Star Wars. She may not look like, no, he says it to Luke, it may not look like much, but she's got it where it counts. But like, that's his thing. And I love that aesthetic. It's not that he doesn't care. It's not just completely mistreated, but Lando's image and Han is, guts and the description of those two characters, even like, Lando has substance certainly, but he's very much image with the cape and, the hair and the whatever. But Han is the gutsy guy. He's the one that's going to just chase down 50 stormtroopers by himself in a hallway in the Death Star.
Yeah. And it's interesting that the Falcon ends up being back with Lando by the time we get to Return of the Jedi. In fact, Han spends almost no time on the Falcon and Jedi. And there's even that scene where he's saying goodbye to her and saying, I feel like I'm going to see it. This is the last time I'm going to see her. And it always made me wonder if there was supposed to be a scene where it gets destroyed. Because that scene is so telegraphed.
Absolutely.
Like, I don't know if I'm going to see her again. Like, either something's going to happen to him or something's going to happen to the ship. And maybe that was just intended to make us think that it was. So
it was Chekhov's Falcon. You make that comment in Jedi, and what's going to happen later in the movie. That was my biggest fear, honestly, with The Rise of Skywalker. We had made it through Force Awakens and Last Jedi, and I love the Falcon. But there was that part of me that was like, are we going to get out of this movie with the Millennium Falcon? Like, that was actually one of my bigger concerns for that movie. And we did, so it's fine. But it's a character too. Yeah.
And it's a character that is supposed to, we get a sense that the ship would live on past these characters.
Right.
So that's why I think in some ways it would be worse to lose the Falcon than any of the other characters, because we expect people to be born and to live and to die. But the ship should be passed on from generation to generation. It should live on forever. It should have a sense of immortality.
Absolutely. And it reminds me, I had this conversation Friday night in a similar way to R2-D2. R2-D2 is the witness to the entire legacy of these characters through the 9 films. He was there in the beginning in Phantom Menace. He's there at the end at Leia's side as she dies. And, for all the times we've heard about 3PO's memories being wiped and whatever, like, R2 was never wiped. Like, he is the witness to the entire history and legacy of these people, much like you're saying with the Falcon and what we learn with L3 being a part of the ship and the language and that old era and what it can be modified, created, passed on to Rey, passed on to somebody else. Like, it's a legacy, a legacy banner almost that carries forth for future generations. And I think that's so cool.
Yeah, totally.
Well, who do you have next? We have Han and the Falcon. What's next up on the list?
The next one is sort of it's not really technically a romance. It's more of a speculation.
That's fine.
And that is Qui-Gon and Smee.
I love it.
This is a fun one for me because there's so little to go on. There's just like right there in that scene, like there's there's a couple of moments in the Phantom Menace where, and it could have just been decisions between the actors of Pernilla August and Liam Neeson deciding that they'll play it very intimate, but they have such few scenes together, and yet there's this incredible ease and intimacy that goes well beyond people that have literally just met each other. It's almost as if there's a force connection, and maybe Qui-Gon is aware of it, maybe she's not, but there seems to be a recognition of their shared destiny, and whether they know fully what it is yet or not is not the point. That there's something there, and there's the scene where Qui-Gon is testing Anakin's blood, and he's having that conversation with him out on the balcony.
Right.
And after the conversation finishes, Qui-Gon looks over, and Shmi is listening from the doorway. And that little look that she gives, where she kind of like she's caught, she's a little embarrassed, and she turns away. It's such a subtle thing, but it's like there's something either going on where she's eavesdropping because she's wondered why her son is so special. And so she's curious about this conversation with this mysterious person who's just showed up, who seems to know a lot about her son. Or maybe it's just she's fascinated with Qui-Gon. Right. So there's something there that the actors, and I don't know if they had a discussion with each other of like they created this backstory between them, of perhaps that they were very instantly attracted to one another or something. But there's definitely chemistry between them.
Absolutely. And I love, even in this one screenshot that I grabbed to put up here, it's the hand on the shoulder. Like that little physical choice, like you said, her standing in the doorway, the physical choice that those actors made to do that one, whether they were told to or not, like it communicates something very specific. The stranger, but there's a connection there, just like you said.
Right. If Qui-Gon had just been that affectionate with her and meeting her for the first time, it would come across as creepy. But she is like she welcomes it. Like the hand on the hand is like it's consensual. There's definitely a mutual thing going on, and that's what makes it really interesting to me. So I'm not a shipper, which is something that I'll have to address when we get to one of my later choices. But that's definitely one that I understand why people would ship the two of them. Of course, they don't have time to get together.
That's right.
They're literally there for what, 2 days? So
just long enough to get that Nubian drive installed, and then it's time to keep going.
It's a potential romance, I should say.
Absolutely, potential for romance. That's an excellent one. What do you have next? What's next up on our list?
Well, addressing the shipping that I just said, I'm not a shipper. There is one couple that I do ship.
Okay.
And I am totally team Storm Pilot.
Yes.
Poe and Finn.
Yes, indeed.
And, I'm a member of the LGBTQ community. So although I'm not somebody that ships normally, I started paying attention to all the online chatter about seeing these two as a couple. And I have to be honest, when I first saw the movie, I didn't read them as a couple. I read it as a bromance. I saw it as being there's two buddies that meet for the first time, and they instantly find they have great rapport with one another. And so they become best friends. And the banter that they have to me was very similar to the friendly banter that occurs within the original three in the original trilogy, like Leia, Han, and Luke. Like that kind of banter was what they were going for in The Force Awakens. But, I started reading through like how fans would sort of go through and say, oh, look at the little lip bite he does when he's handing his jacket back to him. Like that means something right there. That has to be something. And, the more I thought about it, the more I thought, whether or not that was the intention of the writers, it's okay if fans project that onto the characters. Because in the absence of that kind of representation in Star Wars, it's okay when fans who don't see themselves all that often in these stories can project that onto characters and read it as coded that way. And it was obviously something that reached the actors, because by the time The Last Jedi came along, they were leaning into that pretty heavily.
Yes, they were.
And I'm sure you've seen the deleted scenes for The Last Jedi. Rian Johnson shot a scene of Poe and Finn in a hallway talking, and a crew member comes and passes between the two of them as they're having a conversation, which mirrors the conversation between Han and Leia on Hoth.
Absolutely.
And I went back and rewatched that today, preparing for the show, and it happens in that scene not once but twice, where characters walk between them. So it's as if it's like, well, if you didn't see it the first time, we're going to
make sure you don't miss it.
Yeah. So again, it doesn't necessarily have to. I mean, I would have preferred for it to have been made explicit and come right out and said that that's what this is, but they could have at least allowed it to be ambiguous. And I'm disappointed that they didn't at least allow it to be ambiguous. It feels like with The Rise of Skywalker and with introducing, Poe's former, old flame, they were JJ was kind of trying to say, no, that's not who Poe is. Let's put a quash on that right away.
Well, and it's interesting too, because I believe it is I think it's in the book Bloodline, the Claudia Gray book. We get a little bit of, I think it's Bloodline. If I'm wrong, somebody in the chat will tell me. But there's a part where Finn and Poe are undercover. They're going to a ball, or they're going to something like they have to get dressed up and put suits on. And it's this whole deal. And they're having a conversation. And Poe says to Finn, well, what about Rose? And he's like, that's over. And he says, well, what about Rey? He's like, that's not happening either. Like, it's kind of explicitly said, it's not going to be Finn and Rose. It's not going to be Finn and Rey. And it leaves that door, and Poe's just like, oh, okay. So it's not explicit enough. It's not like an outright, like, cool, maybe there is a relationship here. Maybe there is something here. But it continued to kind of and again, before Rise of Skywalker, before JJ, before whatever those decisions were, to kind of shut down the possibility that it was going to be Rose or Rey, which were the two kind of candidates, up through that. One of the two, he was like, yeah, we talked, nothing's happening there. And, the other one, he's like, that's not happening either. Like, Finn was very explicit that he didn't have relationships with these women, but then they just kind of went on, with the mission. And so there are little tidbits and little bits along the way, of, what could it mean? What is there something here? And it was never developed. I agree with you, as much as we wish it could have been.
Also, I think in that very same scene in that book, or maybe I'm thinking of another scene, maybe in Resistance Reborn, but Poe helps Finn tie his tie.
It is that. It's Resistance Reborn. Yeah. It's that scene. I'm sorry, I said Bloodline. Yeah.
I mean, come on. That's
yeah.
That's about as romantic as subtext as you
unless your dad's doing it, it's a romantic action.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, and it was in Resistance Reborn when other characters were commenting on them and saying, well, we thought that you two were just going to go. We thought you would go together because you're just an item. Like, that was, you had other characters that were observing their ship, for lack of a better word. It's just, I just have an issue with Star Wars having that kind of, sort of being playful with it in the written form, or having queer characters appear in novels and comics, but not in live action.
It seems like the path of least resistance in a way. Like, we don't want to have to deal with it too much because somebody's going to pitch a fit. So this is an easy way to satisfy. We're going to give you something, but we're going to avoid possibly making it more of a thing, because it's easier for them.
Right. And I've had to, like, I make it a point to say, I do appreciate the representation. Don't get me wrong.
Sure.
But it just feels a little like when you see how it's used and it's only used in one place and it's not used in the other place, it just becomes really obvious that it's something that they're tiptoeing around.
Absolutely. And I'm not a part of your same community, but I have dear family who, are gay, and, I have a strong feeling and connection to, wanting to see that representation, in Star Wars, in anything, in our world that we live in. And I had some of those thoughts too at the end of Rise of Skywalker, when you have, I can't think of her name now, but when the two ladies, when they kiss right there in the background. And it also had a similar feeling of like, hey, here's something that we hope checks a box so people are happy, but without fleshing out that relationship and fleshing out those characters to go, oh, here's this thing, not, oh, did you see it at the end? Like it was almost more spectacle than not spectacle. Maybe that's not the right way to say it, but it was accomplishing something to make a group of people happy, and we hope this is enough.
Well, there was an interview, and JJ was asked specifically about Poe and Finn, and he was like, no, that's not going to happen, but we have something in the works, so stay tuned.
Yeah.
And it ended up being bad, and it felt like they took this away from us, and they gave us this little other thing, and it just didn't quite do the same thing.
That's right. It was, hopefully this will placate, a group of people.
Yeah.
So, well, hopefully, and as we see, we've got so many new stories. I have not started reading any of the High Republic books, but the more I hear other people talk about them, the more I've started going, I probably need to read these. And so hopefully with all this content that we're getting, Disney Plus shows, Ahsoka, Cassian, Mandalorian continuing, like I'm hoping that there's going to be more expansion for representation of all communities, throughout Star Wars, because as I've said before, this is a galaxy a long time ago and far, far away. It's not supposed to look like, 1960s Selma, Alabama, or, like it's supposed to be diverse. It's supposed to be colorful. It's supposed to have everything.
Yeah, I made a point a long time ago, and I know this is part of Legends, but if the Hutts if you can accept hermaphroditic Hutts, then you can accept gay people in a galaxy far, far away.
Without a doubt.
I mean,
without a doubt. Seriously, what are we talking about here? Well, I love Finn Poe. I'm totally with you on Finn Poe. What do you have for your next one? What do we got next on our list?
Well, the next one is the more traditional romance. It's still not quite as traditional as, say, Anakin and Padme. It's Obi-Wan and Duchess Satine.
Mm-hmm.
I did a rewatch of the Mandalorian arcs in the Clone Wars to get ready for this, and my gosh, I brought a bunch of notes. there is so much to write about these two. There's such Obi-Wan is a fascinating character to me because of his commitment to the Jedi Code. He's so much more devoted to the idea of what he thinks the Jedi should be than what they probably actually are at this time. And part of that includes, his commitment to the no attachment rule. And I thought it was really good writing to give Obi-Wan a backstory where he had to make a choice regarding somebody that Anakin is faced with later down the line, and Anakin makes a different choice. And we see the consequences of Anakin's choice, and we see the consequences of Obi-Wan's choice. And they each chose different things, but we still see that they both ended in tragedy. And perhaps they should have made different choices individually, and maybe they wouldn't have ended in tragedy. But the thing that about Obi-Wan is he is always focused more on his duty to the Order than he is in his personal relationships. He does it with Anakin. Like he's probably closer to Anakin than he is with anybody. And yet, when it came time to, choose his friendship with Anakin over what the council was asking him to do, he chose to side with the council.
Right.
And that was one of those things that drove Anakin further away, was that, my best friend is choosing to side with, people who are doing something that I think is wrong, or asking me to do something that is wrong, and he's siding with them. And but watching the episodes again, I had it in my memory that Obi-Wan had been the one to leave Satine, but in the rewatch, I realized that actually he told Satine if she had told him that she loved him, he would have left the Order.
He would have left. That's right.
And when I got to the part where I got to the arc with Darth Maul in Mandalore, there's that, Obi-Wan arrives on Mandalore and he dresses in Mandalorian armor, and I had forgotten that.
Yeah.
And when I saw that, I thought that's a nice little, I'm not going to call it foreshadowing, but it kind of suggests that if Satine had lived, she would have confessed her love for him and he would have left the Order.
Right.
And maybe the Mandalorian armor was sort of suggesting that his future could have been with
the Mandalorians. That's right.
Yeah, and the Mandalorians. And I thought that was really fascinating. That was one of those things that started turning the wheels of like, hey, I can write a whole episode about
There's a whole thing here. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, that's such an interesting one. And it's so, like you said, the dynamics and the parallels between Obi-Wan and Satine and Obi-Wan and Anakin and what that becomes, as we see the downfall of Anakin and what pushed him away. You hear, discussions about the difference between if Qui-Gon had lived and trained Anakin versus Obi-Wan training, the differences in those relationships. Obi-Wan and Anakin, he says it in Sith, you were my brother. Like, they were brothers. He was a big brother raising a little brother and trying to train him, where Qui-Gon was a very Jedi. Like, he was very much, of the older Jedi tradition, more of that traditional Jedi path, but could have been a different kind of mentor for Anakin. And so to see, Obi-Wan's a little more freewheeling. And like you said, Satine says it, if you had told me, I would have left. It opens up so many possibilities and, things to speculate on, or, what could it have been like if it had been different, if he had left, if Qui-Gon had lived. There's several, avenues that I think parallel each other there neatly. Yeah.
And this isn't related to the romance, but the entire thread of Pre Vizsla coming in as somebody to take over the Mandalorian throne and to sort of unseat her from the throne, and sort of rising up and having the people rise up for, in support of Pre Vizsla and going back to the warring ways. That whole thing resonated very differently for me, given what we've all lived through these past few months, couple of months. She has a line in there where she, let's say I wrote it down. She says something to the effect of, peace only exists in the minds of the faithful. And that really, I was like, wow, that resonated with me, because I thought about, you could say that about democracy. Like, democracy only exists in the minds of the faithful. People who are willing to believe in it. It only exists if people believe in it.
Correct.
And when people stop believing in it, then we don't have anything anymore.
Then we have things that happen on January 6th, and we have a lot of other problematic parts of the last 4 years.
But I find that Star Wars does that a lot, where it really was sort of a warning, not a warning. What am I trying to say? It's a cautionary tale about certain truths about democracy and liberty and society, and it uses these very broad strokes to tell these stories about these broad concepts, but they're so relevant and they continue to come back. I mean, how many times have you heard the line, "This is how liberty dies"? The entire fall of the Republic, of just seeing how democracy falls. Like, George Lucas did his research. He said, this is how it happens politically.
That whole history repeats itself thing. You can apply it a lot of different ways, a lot of different places. And, it is very interesting that, art being subjective, and we talked about this earlier about fan positivity, anger, if Star Wars makes me angry, I shouldn't be a part of Star Wars. because art is subjective. What I get out of it is not exactly what you get out of it, which is not exactly what my 12-year-old gets out of it. But there's some truths that always, kind of come back up. And especially when you study history and stories and constructs of the hero's journey or any of the, George Lucas did the research, and you're exactly right. Like, he didn't just make up a thing about a big walking carpet and a cool guy with a gun. Like, there was stuff behind it, and we still see that stuff now, and we can see reflections of ourselves and our cultures in it. And I think sometimes that's why we get so worked up about it, is because we see ourselves in it, or we see what we want ourselves to be in it, and we're frustrated if we can't get it there.
Yeah, totally.
So that was, gosh, there's a lot on Obi-Wan and Satine. I can't wait for your episode of that.
Yeah.
Well, what do we have next?
The next one that I've got on the list is Hera and Kanan.
Mm-hmm.
So Hera and Kanan are one of my favorites because, you mentioned earlier that Rebels was one of your favorite things in Star Wars. It's my favorite animated Star Wars series by a long shot.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, the romance in this series is handled in such a subtle way in the beginning, where you have to pay close attention to hear what they're saying about the characters.
I missed it the first time.
Yeah, I mean, it's, there's a couple of little hints, like she calls him love.
Yes.
So there's an intimacy there, but they could just be that they're very close friends.
We live in the South. We call each other honey and love and all of the kinds of stuff. Like, it wasn't, and maybe that's why it didn't stand out to me, honestly, is like, I've gone to many restaurants or grocery stores where, I went to Publix today and the lady said, "Thank you, sugar." Like,
yeah,
we don't have a relationship, but it's the South and everybody's friendly. So she called me sugar or baby or honey.
Right.
And so I think that's part of maybe why it didn't click for me the first time. But you're right. It was very subtle early on.
Yeah. And they do something really cool in that, there's this thing that plays out throughout the later seasons where will they kiss or won't they kiss? Like, it's that trope that occurs in romance stories is done a little differently here, because when you start to realize, they've definitely kissed before. They've probably done a lot more than that before. The will they or won't they comes down to not whether they're going to kiss so much as whether she or he will finally confess that, hey, we're like deeply in love with each other.
Right.
Like, we need to be committed to each other. They have made a commitment to the rebellion. And that's where their loyalty lies throughout so much of the show. Mm-hmm. There's even that moment later on in this series where, he says, "We're always thinking about the rebellion, like, but what about us?" It's one of the few times that he or she directly addresses their relationship. And that's when, if you've been paying attention to the relationship, that's when you start to put the pieces together and you're like, oh yeah, like they really are a couple. But the question is not whether they'll get together. It's like whether the commitment is going to be like, we're really going to be committed to each other and make each other the priority instead of everything else, instead of making the Ghost Crew the priority or the rebellion the priority. And I just thought that was a really great angle to take with a romance, that it becomes about something other than the trope of, are they going to get together?
Right. Yeah, they've been together. Are they going to make the commitment towards each other to let be together be the thing, as opposed to, I don't know. Did you read, I think, is it New Dawn, the book?
I did not.
I read it a while back, and this conversation and also my love for Rebels, I haven't done it yet, but it makes me want to go back and reread it, because it is when Kanan and Hera meet, and really has the elements of, how did they get together? What did that look like? What was he doing kind of in hiding, in that stage that he was as a former Jedi on the run? Mm-hmm. And it really, I'd love to go back and reread that, knowing what I know about Rebels, knowing what I, know about that relationship. But to me, it's the most pure relationship maybe in all of Star Wars.
Yeah. Yeah, the family that they have, I've talked on on Forever Star Wars about found family and how that's a recurring theme in Star Wars, and that's a very important theme in the LGBTQ community.
For sure.
Because a lot of people don't feel accepted or embraced by their family, so they go out and they find friends and community that become their family. So that theme in Star Wars is very, very important to me, and it is so strong throughout Rebels, that the Ghost Crew really is like the closest thing to a nuclear family that exists in all of Star Wars. Kanan and Hera are the parents, and Ezra and Sabine and Zeb are the children.
That's right.
And Chopper is
he's the dog or something.
Ornery dog.
That's right.
Or the
chewing up everything. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. It may be that Hondo's the creepy uncle.
Yeah, definitely the creepy uncle. Yeah. But just their relationship also has that. It has an element of tragedy to it because of the sacrifice, and there are people that still to this day. I mean, I'm a fan of the show and I'm very invested in the characters, but I wasn't as affected deeply by the death of Kanan as some people were. Some people have not gotten over that.
Right.
I have some mutuals on Twitter who are like, they can't talk about it without weeping, because it's still really very fresh.
Sure.
And it's because the characters are so well defined that people felt like they knew them.
Yeah. And I love, of course, for me, the clincher is that line, I could always see you, after he's blind, right. Of course, that's just good writing. Like, let's bring it down to the real thing. But to me, it's the most pure relationship in Star Wars. It feels the most real. And I love what you say. And I actually listened, your most recent episode of Forever Star Wars, you talk about found family, and I think you talk about legacy. And that speaks to me, on personal levels. And like you said, it's so important in the LGBTQ community, but that can be a thing, in my community, but as a straight person, as a person with differing political views, I struggle and have difficulties with family who don't agree with me, but I have family and friends who are my family. Like, there's all these different aspects, and you find your community, you find your family, you find the people who are your people. And, and that speaks to me in Star Wars too. And it speaks to me in Rebels a lot. Because, Michael just said it in the live chat. He said it before. I'll say it again. The Ghost Crew is the best family in Star Wars. Sure, they're dysfunctional, but it's kind of more of the 90s sitcom dysfunctional. Ezra and Zeb are fighting over something. Sabine's making art and hanging out and being the cool one. And like you said, Kanan and Hera, the mom and dad. But it is, that relationship to me is very powerful, and it's very special for what Star Wars is and what it brings.
Yeah. Another reason that I'm a big fan of this show is because, unlike the Clone Wars series, felt more almost like an anthology, because the episodes skipped around so often and featured so many different central characters. Ahsoka was a big character in that series, but it wasn't the Ahsoka show. It was an ensemble show, whereas Rebels feels so much more focused on this core group of people and telling their story,
right? With
the backdrop being the early days of the rebellion.
Yeah, it's my favorite. I've said the hill, if I'm to pick a fandom hill to die on, it's the best of the Disney era Star Wars storytelling. That's how I feel about Rebels. And I could go on for 2 hours about Last Jedi and how much I love that, but that's a different other thing. I love Rebels. I love the storytelling. I love what it says about Kanan as a Jedi, what he's trying to, accomplish and do. And it's great. And a key part of that is that relationship of Kanan and Hera. Absolutely. Well, we have, I believe, one more left.
Yeah. And you probably, anybody that's been keeping count, you probably figure out what it's going to be, because there's
it's the one. It's the main
one.
one. It is the one.
Yeah, to bring it full circle, we started out talking where I sort of talked about my origins as a Star Wars fan, and I'm an original trilogy person, so how could I not pick
Han and Leia? Absolutely. And I know we've got some audio listeners if they're not tuned into the video stream tonight, but the picture I've got up on the screen at the moment, it is actually the same scene that you talked about earlier, Han and Leia in the hallway on Hoth right before the evacuation, probably right before the person's going to come walk between the two of them. And it's one of these little Valentines I found online, and it says, Han and Leia, there is no one in the galaxy I'd rather argue with.
Well, I mean, that scene, they bicker in Star Wars, in the original Star Wars, they're bickering, but it's more of the three of them are doing it, right. And the trilogy wanted to make them a romantic triangle. And even in Empire, there's, they're hinting that maybe it's a romantic triangle. So that could have turned out very awkward. But, the movie starts with them like doing this Hepburn and Tracy bit where they're like having this old, like almost art dialogue out of the 40s, where the way couples would talk and argue with each other. And, it's like shorthand for sexual tension. It's always been those kinds of scenes and tension has always just suggested that, these people are really into each other. And have you read any of the, from a different point of view, the book on Empire? Have you read? I haven't
read the Empire one yet. I've read the first one. I'm behind. I struggle with getting all of my reading done because I like audiobooks, but I also listen to way too many podcasts, not only Star Wars, but a bunch of other things. And then like at night when like I could get in bed, my wife goes to bed early and I stay up late, and I could read a book, but it's a lot easier just to like watch a show on my iPad. So again, path of least resistance. I need to do better about catching up on some reading, but no, that one's still on the list.
Well, this is a very mild spoiler, but there's a thread that runs throughout some of the stories that take place in Hoth, which is that several of the characters comment at some point about how insufferably obvious Han and Leia's romance is. Like, people are like saying like, oh God, they're in the hallway fighting again. Would they just, why don't they just kiss?
Yeah, they obviously get it over with.
Right. And so everybody's like placing bets as to like when they're finally going to hook up. Like, it becomes a funny joke of like, these people are making such a spectacle out of the fact of, yes, we get it. You're in, like, you are really into each other. That's so much fun. That aspect of the relationship is a lot of fun. But I think the thing that I really enjoy about their relationship is how both of them are such strong-willed characters, and yet when they do finally have those quiet, tender moments, it's incredibly intimate. And Leia especially is a character that she puts up so many walls and so many barriers, and he's the one person that can bring all those barriers crashing down. And seeing her in like a vulnerable and unsure of herself is incredibly endearing, not because she's she is a strong leader, and I love Leia. Leia is one of my favorite characters because she is so resilient and
absolutely
strong-willed, and she's inspirational because she's been through so much, and yet she's weathered it, and she's done so with grace. And yet when you see her vulnerable, when you see her unsure of herself, it just humanizes her, because we need to see these, characters that we put up on pedestals. We need to see them, sort of trying to find their footing.
Absolutely.
There's nothing that does not diminish a character at all. That's why I have a very strong affinity for The Last Jedi. And I know a lot of fans are upset with the way that Luke was depicted in that movie, but to
me, it was perfect. It really was.
Yeah. It just really speaks to seeing the characters as fully formed, fully flawed. It makes, if they don't have personal struggle, then when they achieve great things, it doesn't mean as much. You know, I love seeing.
I heard somebody recently, it's the Superman problem. Like, if Superman can do all the things that Superman can do, where's the problem? Where's the conflict? Where is he can fly, he's invincible, he's this, he's that. Like, somewhere along the line, they found kryptonite or they found this other thing, but like, he can do it all. Like, there's really not that much there. There's not a humanity like Luke. And to me, the power of Last Jedi, Friday night, I've referenced Friday night a couple times on the Force Connect show. They were doing Mount Rushmore, who are your 4, key characters. And I went with Anakin / Vader because that was the change in the Jedi. Like, right at the time that the Jedi were failing, the Sith were taking over. Anakin failed, became Vader. But then my number 2 was Luke, and especially Luke in The Last Jedi, because he was the change point. He was the one that went, it was, he says it in that speech to Rey in the cave. The Jedi were foolish. They were blocked. They thought they knew what they were doing, and they didn't. Like, they didn't know what was going on. The humility for him to say, this isn't how it's going to go. We were wrong, because they didn't have that. The Jedi of the prequels era didn't have that humility. They were just keeping going forward, whether they knew what was going on or not. And that humanity and the humility in it that you see in Leia in those weak moments, I think is what's powerful about any of these characters, but especially in her.
Yeah. And I remember when the Force Awakens came out, that people were upset that Han and Leia had broken up at some point. And, I thought about that in preparing for this show. And one of the things that stands out to me in The Force Awakens is, in spite of the fact that they did separate at one point, I don't get a sense that they're truly divorced.
I don't either.
I mean, they kind of went in opposite paths for a while, but they were still so connected. And when they come together in the way they speak about Ben, and it's obvious that they are still very much family.
And they were both struggling with that humanity. And I think it's Leia that says, he starts to apologize, and she says, look, we both went back to the one thing we know. I went back to being a leader and a general and a rebel. You went back to flying ships and smuggling and racing or whatever. Like, that was all they knew. It was a conditional built-in default. Like, that's what you escape to if you don't know what's going on, or if you're in crisis, you go to something you know.
Right.
And I agree with you. I don't think that they had, fully divorced or separated. It was just like, this is how we're getting by.
Yeah. The only sadness or regret I have about The Force Awakens is that the story skipped over such an important part of their lives. I feel like those early years with Ben Solo, is when he was a baby. Those are really important years that we never got to see.
For sure.
And to hear about them only in exposition, just, I don't know. It's just, I feel like that could have been its own trilogy right there. That I would have liked to have seen more of that part of their relationship, because by the time we catch up with them in The Force Awakens, so many decades have gone by at this point that we're just seeing them at the very end of their story. So we see their beginning of their story and we see the end of their story, but we don't see the middle of it.
Yep.
So that's the one regret I have, is that feel like there's so much more to be said about Han and Leia's romance.
Well, and it's so fun, and especially for us as original trilogy guys, what we get of them, even if it was weird at the beginning of Empire, and as you see the shift, away from, okay, maybe Luke's not a part of this triad, or whatever, threesome, whatever, but moving into Jedi, like, you get a little bit of that, like, Sam and Diane Cheers thing. Like, there's still the cheeky, my hands are dirty. Well, my hands are dirty too. Or, I love the scene in Jedi when they're hot wiring the door and they get held up, and he says, "I love you," and she says, "I know," right before she shoots the guard that came up behind him. Like, those little, like, we get each other. They connect, and there is that. I see you, you see me too. Like, it's really, again, it's fun, it's well done, and it speaks to romance, adventurous romance, maybe.
And how could they not be number one when they gave us one of the greatest movie quotes of all time? The "I love you, I know" is right up there with "Here's looking at you, kid."
It absolutely is. It absolutely is. Every now and then, I'm sure because of the amount of just general Star Wars interneting that I do, like on a Facebook populated ad that has been triggered by an algorithm or something, you'll get like the, Kay Jewelers, his and her wedding bands. And one of them says, "I love you." And one of them says, "I know." And I'm like, I know there's somebody out there that's really doing that. But again, it's iconic. Like it really is, a big thing.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
But it's so fantastic. Well, I don't know about you, but I think this has been a fabulous Star Wars Valentine's list. I think you did an excellent job.
Thank you.
I love, talking about, and we could go for another 2 hours about all the other couples or people or whatever.
Oh yeah.
I was really interested to see what you would send me as we were getting ready for this. And I love every choice you made. I love the Finn Poe, Kanan and Hera, of course, hit me right in the feels, as the kids would say. I thought about after I got your list, I was like, what is one that I would add? Like if I could add on one more, if we could make it 8. Yeah. I think I decided that my 8th would be Zeb and Kallus. Because I love the story of Kallus. I love the arc of Kallus. There's a part of us that are all like, I want to be a rebel, but the Empire has cool ships and cool uniforms and cool whatever. And so to be that Imperial turned rebel, and my 12-year-old daughter, Harper, maybe her favorite Star Wars character behind Han Solo is Kallus. Like she loved that arc of Kallus and Rebels. Mm-hmm. But that, it started out the two of them trapped on that planet and having to help each other to survive, and talking about, what the Empire did to Zeb's people. I can't think of the species name at the moment. But what they did. And then at the end, in that epilogue that we get right at the end of Rebels, and he takes Kallus to meet them on the planet that they've gone to. And there's just that little moment. I'm like, yeah, I just want those two to be, together and have her life and have this, because they connected over combat early on and as adversaries. And then it changed as Kallus came into, the rebellion and the things that he did as New Fulcrum. And so that's the ship that I have is Zeb and Kallus. I don't think it has a cool name, but that's the one that I would add to the list if I got to pick one. Yeah,
that scene where they're in the cave together, that one of the things that's in that episode is an element of vulnerability. Is it Kallus that's injured? Kallus
yes.
Injured. So he's totally at the mercy of Zeb. Yep. So there is this dynamic of these are enemies and one has power of the other one, but they decide to spare each other and they try to work together. Like there's that builds intimacy and it builds trust. So you understand why people would ship two characters that way, because that's how a lot of relationships have to start, whether they're romantic or platonic. Those kinds of deeper relationships begin with being vulnerable with somebody and having to trust somebody. So yeah, I'm on board with that.
Yeah, totally works. Mark, I can't thank you enough for joining me tonight, for hanging out on Valentine's Day. Again, apologies to your husband if I'm keeping you from something. I know in my house, we spent the day at the lake. We went and hiked. We did all kinds of stuff, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to go inside and we're going to watch an episode of Deadwood before we all go to sleep for the night, or at least my wife and I. The kids are not going to watch Deadwood, but. This has been so much fun. I'm so thankful that you had a chance to join me tonight. Is there anything that I know you said you've kind of been on a little bit of a hiatus, but you've got the wheels spinning maybe about some new episodes. Is there anything you want to plug? I've got your, Twitter handle on here if anybody wants to connect on Twitter and catch up. What do you have? You have anything you want to plug?
No, I just wanted to mention just check out ClashingSabers.net. That's the website where we write articles about Star Wars. The Clashing Sabers Network has other shows besides Forever Star Wars. There's Don't Burn the Sacred Texts, where Brandon and Lindsay go over the books of Star Wars current canon. We have a Starships episode series that's for people that like to ship, and we have a pair of that host a show called Sith Talk. It's Zach and Sam. That's one of the other prominent shows on the network. So Excellent. There's a lot of different kinds of shows to check out. So
absolutely
encourage folks to check it out.
Well, everybody find Mark on Twitter. Check out ClashingSabers.net. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you all to anybody in the live chat. Thank you to anybody that came and hung out tonight. We always love doing this. I'm looking forward to the next several weeks. I've got guests lined up, some fun folks that y'all are going to enjoy as well. In the meantime, come and find us on Twitter. We are at WillsPod. If I was better at this, I'd have it already up on the screen. Come find us on WillsPod, share us out, subscribe on YouTube. Thank you for hanging out with us tonight. And as always, may the Force be with you.